Video, we're going to talk about the Delta Loan Forgiveness Simulation Tool. And this is our first version of the tool. It's based on what we understand of the current regulations. Obviously, there is going to be a lot of new regulations issued by the SBA that might change a lot of these calculations that we currently have in this model. But at least right now, as you go through doing some calculations to understand what the impact of everything is, this tool will be very helpful in getting an understanding of those things. So we're going to walk through this in different sections and show you how the simulation tool works. Okay, first of all, if you look at the tabs on this worksheet, you can see that there are 4 tabs. There's 4 worksheets in this book. And the first 2 are where we're going to spend most of the time. But we have a simulation page which gathers data relative to the loan and projected expenses. The forgiveness page does some actual calculations. The planning tool is what we're going to use to measure the 8-week process for right now. And based on that planning tool, it will do an actual calculation of forgiveness as you're moving forward. So where we're going to spend most of our time right now on this video is on the simulation side and the forgiveness side. So we're going to walk through each section, and we'll tell you how we did these calculations and what the basis is for some of these. So let's begin with the simulation. First of all, the first section we have is the original loan request. In here, we really only need to put what the original amount is, and in this situation, I have $290,000. I put in the sample calculation tool for the PPP program. So if you really kind of wanted to know a calculation for whatever reason, you could do the calculation. It's not tied to the loan amount. You're able to, based on what you get approved for, put in a loan amount that you're looking for. And by the way, these purple sections are all the data entry cells that you actually need to enter into. Okay. The second section is the actual expenses for the 8-week period. Obviously, payroll we're going to describe later on, but there are certain things like group health insurance, mortgage interest, rent, utilities, and interest on other loans. Whatever you put in for a monthly number will be doubled, assuming that it would be paid twice in an 8-week period of time. So obviously on the health insurance, I put in $7,000 here. It's doubled for $14,000 and so forth and so on. So that'll give you your calculation of projected expenses for the 8-week period. The last section on the simulation tool is related to 2 things. One is headcount, and the other is salary for each individual employee. And there are 3 headcount or FTE calculations that you need to be aware of. One is your full-time equivalents for the 8-week measurement period. The second is the average FTEs for the period February 15th, 2019 through June 2019, and the average number of FTEs for January 1st through February 29th of 2020. This is because you are allowed to use one or the other calculation on the FTEs for 2019 or 2020. It's something you have an option for, and I'll go through some of those calculations as we get into the simulation tool. The last calculation that we want to talk about is relates to a not having a 25% decrease in pay per individual. And there's a lot of confusion around this because it can work so many different ways. And what we did is we tried to take a simplified approach to this, because usually the look back period that you're looking at is 2019. And someone could earn a compensation for 2019 if they were employed the full year. They could be employed for just part of the year. And they may not even be employed in 2019, and you could have hired them after the fact. Or you could have hired them in the 8-week period. So by doing a weekly payroll and understanding what their weekly compensation is, this seems to be the easiest way to handle all those situations. For example, employee number 1, I have $1,800 as their original weekly pay. Their new weekly pay is really the weekly pay during the 8-week period. So if this person received $1,800 a week before and they received $1,800 a week now, they are at 100% of their original salary. Therefore, when we look at the payroll for the 8-week period, all of their payroll is an allowable expense. Now, as we go into this and we go down, there is an employee here, employee number 18, where they were paid $1,100 a week before. For whatever reason, their pay is being cut to $500 a week, so they're receiving only 45% of their payroll, their historical payroll. Even though they may receive an actual compensation, none of their pay is deductible or allowable under the forgiveness calculations, because the $500 has been is more than a 25% reduction in pay. So we'll go into these calculations in a little bit and how to use some of these weekly number of weeks paid. Now, based on the numbers that we put in the simulation section of this workbook, we can now see that we have a loan amount of $290,000. We have the 75% test, which has reduced our loan by $2,500. The number of employees test has reduced it by $15,000, and the reduction in salaries has reduced it by $6,400. So given all these situations, we now have a net forgivable amount of $265,000. The balance of which will be financed. There'll be 1% for the 6-month period that all this loan evaluation was taking place, as well as you're going to add that to the total to come up with a new loan amount, and then that will be financed over 24 months at 1%. So the monthly payment will be $1,030 for those 24 months. So let's look at how some of these results have been calculated. So when we look at the reduction based on a minimum of 75% payroll cost test, what we see here is data is coming from the worksheets in the simulation page, okay, and it's coming over here to the forgiveness page, and it's being put into this is the projected spending for the 8-week period of time. Now, the 75% test comes into play because I'm not utilizing my full $290,000 because I'm limited based on the payroll costs. Payroll costs are only projected at $215,000, and because of that, there isn't enough payroll. If I divide that number by 75%, I'm going to get $287,432. So since this is the mandatory most I can allocate or be forgiven under the 75% test, these additional expenses were all prorated down to arrive at the $287,000. So now looking at the reduction based on the number of employees, I had 26 employees during the 8-week period. I have 28 at a prior test, and again, it's choosing the lower of the two numbers. And if I look at that, it takes $215,000 and reduces it to $199,000 as allowable. When I do the math and subtract the 199 from the 215, that's a reduction caused by headcount of 15,371, and that number comes up here to the forgiveness calculation. The last calculation is the 8-week payroll time frame. So what we have is we have what the actual payroll is, and it is the calculation based on, for example, what this person worked 8 weeks only at $500 a week, but as far as allowable, zero of it is allowable because that person's payroll was reduced by more than 25%. So these things total up, and it gives me my actual payroll, and then it tells me my allowable payroll, and that difference is $6,400. That credit now comes up here, and these are my 3 component credits that come up to my reduced net forgivable amount. And again, all the calculations. Now, for planning purposes, which we'll do another video on later, we do have a planning tool where you can put in a number, and once you do, it'll total it across. And when you come over to the calculating results for sample forgiveness, it'll track this, so you can constantly stay on top of how much is getting forgiven, because these calculations are constantly getting done. I hope you enjoyed this tool. I think we've covered just about everything in these calculations, and I believe we've calculated them the best way we know how. And until there's further guidance, this is what we know for the math on the calculations.